Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
Nancy Beaumont woke early on January 26, 1966, to oppressive heat already building before dawn. It was Australia Day, a public holiday, and by the time she was preparing breakfast, the temperature was climbing relentlessly, the kind of scorching summer day where even the breeze off St Vincent's Gulf offered no relief. The children were already awake, excited. They were hot but looking forward to a day at the beach. Nancy looked at her three children across the breakfast table that morning. Jane, 9 years old, quiet and responsible, the kind of child who could be trusted completely. Arnna, 7, chatty and social, already talking about what she'd do at the beach. And Grant, just 4, the baby of the family, who idolised his sisters and followed them everywhere. Nancy's husband, Jim, had left the previous day for a sales trip to Snowtown. He wouldn't be back until later. It was just Nancy and the children in the house at Somerton Park. The beach made sense. Glenelg was only 3 kilometres away, a short bus ride the children had made dozens of times before. On a public holiday, it would be packed with families, safe, normal, the kind of thing every family in Adelaide would be doing that day. Nancy counted out the coins at the kitchen table, 6pence for the bus to Glenelg, another 6pence for the return trip, 6 shillings for lunch. She repeated the rules to the reliable Jane. Catch the 8:45 bus, stay together, buy lunch at Wenzel's where staff knew them, catch the noon bus home. The 2 p.m. bus at the latest if they were having too much fun to leave. Jane carefully tucked the coins into her small airline-style bag along with her copy of Little Women, her favourite book, the one she carried everywhere. She wore a green floral dress and white sandals. Arnna had chosen an orange dress with white shorts underneath, and Grant was already in his red and white striped t-shirt and blue shorts, clutching his towel, ready for the beach. At 8:45am, Nancy walked with them to the bus stop. The morning sun was already brutal. She watched them board, 3 well-behaved children, excited for a day at the beach, already laughing about something Arnna had said. The bus pulled away. Nancy waved. She expected them home by lunchtime, perhaps a bit after, if they lost track of time playing in the water. But she would spend the rest of her life waiting for them to come home. Welcome to Struth, a podcast where we venture into Australia's most perplexing mysteries that continue to defy explanation decades later. Before we go any further today, a quick warning that this episode discusses the disappearance and presumed murder of 3 young children. And while we've avoided the graphic details, the subject matter may be distressing to some listeners, and listener discretion is certainly advised. For those wondering about the title of the show, Struth is what you mutter when confronted by something so impossible, so utterly incomprehensible that your mind struggles to accept it's real. It's a shortened form of God's truth, an expression Australians use when facts are so extraordinary they sound like fiction. It's what you say when 3 children vanish from a crowded beach in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses, and are never seen again. I'm your storyteller, and today we're beginning a special 2-part investigation into one of Australia's most devastating mysteries. We're travelling back to Australia Day 1966 to Glenelg Beach in Adelaide, where Jane, Arnna and Grant Beaumont disappeared in circumstances that would haunt a nation for nearly 6 decades. This wasn't a case of children wandering into the bush or being swept out to sea. Multiple witnesses saw them playing with an unidentified man. They were seen buying lunch with money they shouldn't have had. They were seen walking away from the beach willingly with someone they appeared to trust completely. And then they were gone, Over the next 2 episodes, we'll explore not just what happened on that terrible day, but the decades-long investigation that followed. The suspects, the excavations, the parents who spent 53 years searching for answers, and a nation that lost its innocence in a single afternoon. This is part 1, the disappearance. The children arrived at Glenelg Beach around 8:50 a.m, disembarking near the jetty where families were already claiming their spots on the sand. Glenelg was Australia's most popular beach, a long stretch of golden sand with a historic jetty stretching into Gulf St Vincent, backed by a grassy reserve and the shops of Jetty Road. For the next 2 hours, the children did exactly what Nancy expected them to do. They swam in the shallow water near the jetty, they played on the sand. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what children do at the beach on a hot summer day. But someone was watching them. At around 11 a.m, a 74-year-old woman sitting on a bench at Collie Reserve, the grassy area between the beach and Jetty Road, observed something that seemed innocent at the time. 3 children matching the Beaumont's description were playing energetically with a tall, sun-tanned man in navy blue swimming trunks, with white stripes down the side. The children were jumping over him, flicking him with towels, laughing with complete abandon. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s, with light brown hair swept back, a thin face, and an athletic build. What struck the woman most was how comfortable the children appeared. This wasn't the awkward interaction of children meeting a stranger. They were playing with him the way children play with a favourite uncle or family friend. Completely at ease, utterly trusting. And here's the chilling detail she would recall later. The man had been lying on his towel even before they arrived. He'd been there first, waiting. The woman watched this innocent scene for some time before the group moved away from her view. She thought nothing of it. It was a crowded beach on a public holiday. There were families everywhere, children playing, and nothing seemed amiss at the time. At around midday, the man approached an elderly couple sitting nearby. He asked if they'd seen anyone near his belongings, claiming money had been stolen from his thing. The couple found the question odd. Nothing seemed disturbed, but what happened next struck them as even stranger. The man walked back to where the children were playing and proceeded to dress all 3 of them. He dressed Jane, who at 9 years old was certainly capable of dressing herself. He dressed 7-year-old Arnna. He dressed 4-year-old Grant. This level of physical intimacy for those who observed it suggested a close relationship, a parent or guardian performing a routine task. But the elderly couple didn't recognise the man as being with the children earlier. Something about the scene felt slightly off, though they couldn't articulate why. At around 12:15 p.m, the group walked together towards the changing sheds. The children followed the man willingly, showing no signs of distress or reluctance. They appeared to be going with him voluntarily, perhaps even happily. After a few minutes, the man emerged from the changing sheds, now dressed, and the group walked away from the beach together, heading in the direction of Jetty Road. This was the last confirmed sighting of the Beaumont children at Glenelg Beach. At approximately 12:20 p.m, the assistant at Wenzel's Bakery on the corner of Moseley Street and Jetty Road looked up to see 3 familiar faces. The Beaumont children came to the shop often enough that the staff recognised them. Jane was at the counter, making a purchase. She bought 5 pasties, 6 finger buns, 1 meat pie in a separate bag. The children had never bought a meat pie on previous visits. And 2 large bottles of fizzy drink. The shop assistant watched Jane count out the money to pay. It wasn't the coins Nancy had carefully given her that morning. Jane paid with a £1 note. In 1966, a pound note was worth approximately $39 to $40 in today's money. It was far, far more than 6pence and 6 shillings Nancy had provided for bus fare and lunch. This was someone else's money. The quantity of food also seemed excessive for 3 children planning to catch the noon bus home. This was food for an extended outing, or food meant to be shared with someone else entirely. After leaving Wenzel's bakery at around 12:30 p.m, the children's movements become disputed and murky. A postman later claimed to see them walking along Jetty Road at around 3 p.m. 3 children, holding hands, laughing, seemingly unconcerned, despite being hours late. But he later changed his statement, saying he might have seen them in the morning instead. His testimony became unreliable. Another witness, Miss Daphne Gregory, reported seeing the children with a man around 2:45 p.m. She described how he walked with his arms bowed like an ape and carried an airline bag similar to the one Jane had been carrying. But her sighting was never confirmed by other witnesses. What is certain is this: the children did not catch the noon bus home. They did not catch the 2 p.m. bus. And by 3 p.m, when Jim Beaumont arrived home early from his sales trip and learned the children were missing, they had been gone for over 6 hours. Nancy's worry had been building all afternoon. When the noon bus arrived without her children, she told herself they were having too much fun to leave. When the 2 p.m. bus came and went, she felt the first stirrings of real concern. And by 3 p.m, when Jim walked through the door hours earlier than expected, she was downright frightened. Jim didn't hesitate. He immediately drove to Glenelg Beach, parking near the jetty and walking the length of the sand, searching faces, calling names. The beach was still crowded with holiday makers. Music played from transistor radios. Children splashed in the shallows, but his children weren't there. He went to Wenzel's bakery, and yes, the staff remembered seeing them. Around lunchtime, they said. They'd bought pasties and buns. But that was hours ago now. No one had seen them since. Jim drove slowly along Jetty Road, scanning the footpaths, looking for 3 small figures. Nothing. He checked Collie Reserve. He checked the shops. He drove through the streets between the beach and their home, thinking perhaps they'd decided to walk. Perhaps they'd gotten confused about which bus to catch. By late afternoon, he'd collected Nancy, and together they'd expanded the search. They'd gone to friends' houses, the park near their home, back to the beach, back to the shops. The sun was setting, painting the sky brilliant orange and crimson, and their children were still nowhere to be found. At 5:30 p.m, nearly 9 hours after the children had boarded that morning bus, Jim and Nancy walked into Glenelg Police Station and reported their children missing. The response would later be criticised as inadequate. There were only 2 police officers available at Glenelg Station, 1 telephone. In those first crucial hours when evidence might have been preserved, when witnesses' memories were freshest, when the trail was warmest, the police were simply overwhelmed. They didn't take it seriously enough. They classified it as missing persons, not abduction. They didn't immediately establish roadblocks or monitor the airport and train station. Who knows what evidence was lost in those first 24 to 48 hours? Perhaps that delay enabled whoever took the children to cleanly get away with the crime. By the next morning, everything had changed. News of the missing Beaumont children spread across Adelaide and then right across Australia. Within 24 hours, the entire nation knew their names and faces. Hundreds of people lined up at Glenelg Police Station to give statements, to report sightings, and to offer theories. Sea rescue squadron boats searched the waters off Glenelg. Police cadets conducted a shoulder-to-shoulder search of 70 acres. And the Padawalonga boat haven was drained after a woman reported seeing 3 children there at 7 p.m. on the day of the disappearance. But despite this intense public interest and support with the searches, they found nothing. Not one of the 17 items the little children had been carrying. Their towels, Jane's airline bag with her beloved copy of Little Women, their clothing, Grant's red and white striped shirt, none of it was ever found. This strongly suggested the children hadn't drowned or wandered off. Someone had taken them, likely in a vehicle, and disposed of everything. On January the 29th, just 3 days after the disappearance, the Adelaide Sunday Mail ran a headline that made every parent's blood run cold. Sex crime now feared. The nation's innocence was evaporating with each passing day. As the investigation intensified, a profile of the suspect emerged from multiple witness statements. The consistency of the descriptions was striking. Witnesses who hadn't spoken to each other provided remarkably similar accounts. This man was approximately 6 feet tall, in his mid-30s, with a thin face and light brown hair to fair hair, swept back and neatly parted. He had a suntan complexion that suggested someone who spent considerable time outdoors. His build was athletic, fit. He wore navy blue Speedo-type swimming trunks with single white stripes down each side. But the most significant detail wasn't his appearance. It was the children's comfort with him. Jane was described by her parents and those who knew her as particularly shy. The kind of child who didn't warm easily to strangers, and yet witnesses saw her playing with this man, laughing, completely at ease. She even allowed him to dress her, to lead her away from the beach, to direct her movements. This level of trust suggested familiarity. Investigators developed a theory that would haunt the case for decades to come. The children had likely met this man before, probably on previous beach visits. He'd groomed them over time, establishing trust, perhaps buying them treats, engaging them in conversation, and learning their routines. This theory gained support from something Arnna had mentioned to Nancy weeks earlier. She'd told her mother that Jane had got a boyfriend down the beach. Nancy had dismissed it as childish talk about a playmate. Children that age often spoke in those terms about any friendly interaction. But in retrospect, it might have referenced this man. The £1 note Jane used at Wenzel's Bakery was almost certainly his money. He'd given it to them either as a gift or part of whatever story he'd told to lure them away. Let's go buy more food for a picnic. Let's get supplies for an adventure. Whatever he said, they'd believed him. All of this evidence combined suggested that this wasn't a random opportunistic abduction. This was a predator who had identified his victims, studied their patterns, cultivated their trust, and waited for the perfect opportunity. Australia Day, a crowded beach busy with families, where one more man with children wouldn't stand out. Parents were relaxed, off guard, celebrating. The children were alone, unsupervised, but perfectly safe according to the social norms of 1966. It was, in the most horrifying sense, a perfect crime. Over the following weeks, police pursued hundreds of leads. They interviewed potential witnesses across Adelaide. They investigated every reported sighting, no matter how implausible. They followed up on theories that the children had been taken interstate, that they'd been seen in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. But as the weeks turned into months and months turned into years, the terrible reality settled over the investigation. The Beaumont children were almost certainly dead, killed shortly after their abduction, their bodies hidden somewhere investigators had not yet searched. The question wasn't whether they were alive. The question was who took them and where are they buried? And these questions would consume investigators for decades. They would generate over 100 suspects, 3 major excavations using cutting-edge forensic technology, and a search that continues to this day, 60 years later, with a $1 million award still in place. The man who waited at Glenelg Beach that morning had a plan. He had patience, he had opportunity, and he succeeded in a crime so terrible that it would change an entire nation's understanding of childhood safety. But he made mistakes. Witnesses saw him. They remembered his appearance, his mannerisms, the way he walked. They saw him with the children playing, dressing them, leading them away. And over the decades that follows, investigators would pursue these glimpses, these fragments of memory, hoping they would eventually lead to the truth. In the weeks following January 26, 1966, as Jim and Nancy Beaumont endured the agony of not knowing, as searchers combed Adelaide and beyond, as the nation grappled with the realisation that 3 children could vanish in broad daylight, the investigation was only just beginning. What no one could have possibly known then was how long that investigation would continue, how many suspects would be examined and cleared, or would die before they could be charged, how many locations would be searched, dug up, analysed with technologies that didn't even exist in 1966, how many false leads, hoaxes and heartbreaking dead ends would torment the family. And most of all, no one could have known that Nancy and Jim Beaumont would spend the next 53 and 57 years searching for their children, never finding them in their lifetimes, never learning what happened, never receiving the closure that would allow them to truly grieve. In part 2 of this investigation, we'll examine the suspects who emerged over 6 decades. We'll explore the excavations that promised answers but delivered only more questions. We'll witness the evolution of forensic technology applied to a cold case that refuses to grow colder. And we'll confront the devastating human cost of a mystery that has endured for 60 years. The investigation into the Beaumont Children's disappearance remains active. South Australia Police maintains a $1 million reward for information leading to conviction or recovery of remains. If you have any information about this case, no matter how insignificant it may seem, please contact Crime Stoppers in Australia on 1800 333 000. All information will be treated in the strictest of confidence. Sometimes the smallest detail, a memory you've carried for decades, something you saw but didn't think was important, can be the piece that finally solves a mystery. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this 2-part episode of Struth. Join me next time for part 2, The Investigation, where we'll examine the suspects, the searchers, and the heartbreaking legacy of Australia's most enduring missing children case. It'd be great if you could drop us a like, tell a friend about the podcast, whatever you can do to support independent podcasting in Australia. Thanks for listening.